Hey guys, here we are with our second Reddit installment. Let me just tell my opponent good luck, and we can begin. So they're rated towards the higher end of what I'm looking for, and hopefully we still have a good game. Hopefully I can provide some better commentary, at least talk about my thoughts. They're saying that they've read my Reddit posts. I'm just telling them thanks for being willing to partake in this. So we're just waiting for them to make their first move. I mean, by all accounts, they're quite a decent player. Their correspondence, it's only 2 games, but it's at 22 games at 1958. So let's see how things go. e4, c6. Then I'm going to play knight f3. Probably shortly thereafter I'll play knight c3. And then just pawn e3. They're likely to either play the bishop out first, as they did, or sometimes they can play just e6 directly. So this move, in some variations where the bishop isn't played to f5, the queen can come to c2, but that certainly does prevent me from playing queen c2. So let's just play e3, and then maybe I'll get my bishop to d3. Excellent. So I'm going to play my bishop out to d3, and if they exchange, I'm quite alright just recapturing with my queen. This is a pretty strong bishop here on the f5 square, so if they want to exchange that, I won't complain. They opt to delay capturing, which is fine. I think I want to just continue developing, and they can recapture here and give me these doubled pawns, but again, I don't think I mind that too much. So one idea I have is to play queen c2 now, threatening the bishop on f5, and also I'm kind of guarding my knight a little bit better, so that if they do capture my knight with bishop capture c3, I have the option of recapturing with my queen if I want to. So what does black need to do in this position? Well, they still need to develop this knight here, and which is one of the reasons why I'm delaying, why I'm not capturing my the d pawn with my c pawn, because if I say capture here, they could in theory just recapture with their c pawn, and now they have this beautiful square for their knight to come to. So I don't want to give them that opportunity, so I'll wait for them probably to capture my c pawn. So what kind of ideas might black have in this position? Well, as we can see, they may want to just occupy this square here. So let's just take a second and look at this. I'm hitting at this square 3 times, but this square is only defended twice. So if I capture with my bishop first, then how do they respond? They might try to do this intermezzo where they capture with the pawn, but I can then just recapture with my queen, and once my queen is on this square, I'll be hitting at the bishop, as well as my bishop here is still defending my knight, which is hopped into this square. So I think that's a mistake on their part. So one thing you can do, if we go back here, is you can always, before you make a move somewhere, you can see how many times your pieces are hitting a square versus how many times your opponent is defending it. So here I have 1, 2, 3 attacking, or at least defending that square. And at this point, they had 1, 2, 3 also fighting for this square. So we were kind of equally contesting that square. But once they go knight e4, now they only have 2 pieces, or a piece and a pawn defending that square. And so it looks like I'm going to be winning just a clean piece here. Now let's talk about what black should do from here on out. Well, we can think of both the short-term and the long-term strategy. So in the long term, oh, I didn't win a clear piece. I'm sorry. I won a pawn. That was a mistake. But let's return to what I was saying. In the long term, I have the advantage because I'm up a pawn now, and so an endgame should favor me, although there are always chances to hold. But black needs to play more dynamically now, because that is what hopefully they've gained. Hopefully they like to think they've gained compensation for the pawn, and so really they need to play for short-term activity and try and find some value for the pawn that they lost. And what do I need to do? I need to try and get this bishop activated. And how do I want to activate it? Well, I would love to be able to get it onto b2 and eventually move this d-pawn so that I'm looking at the g7 square. So one idea I can try to employ is to first play a3 and then eventually play b4. Lastly, put my bishop on b7, and that would help complete development. However, you would notice in that scenario I do have a lot of pawns on dark squares, and that's kind of a short-term disadvantage of my play. Alternatively, I could develop my bishop to d2, and if they were to recapture, or if they already capture, I could then capture with my knight. But I like my knight on the f3 square because it does help me control the e5 square. Furthermore, getting this pawn push in will help me secure the c5 square a little bit better if they're thinking about trying to make a break. Alright, so they're thinking. And what else can we say about the position? Well, the position is quite solid. They're going to bring their bishop here to c7 afterwards. They're going to be eyeing this h2 square, another reason why I want to keep my knight here. Okay, and so now we see, besides for this h2 square, black is again applying some pressure on this square, and you might see a move like rook e8 being played. Or also, that's a very natural move, kind of hitting at my queen, trying to displace the queen. That's also good because I did have this idea of trying to get the d5 push in. However, with the knight on f6, they're clearly guarding this square. So I need to think about shifting my play. I can either pull my queen back, or I can keep my queen out. I think I'll It's a tough decision to make. So if I go queen h4, what kind of things can they set up? They could try and reroute their bishop to get over to this square. But is it passive to play something like queen c2? I think I'll test my fate and try and play this move, and maybe bring my rook ad1 and try and get the pawn push in, and then I kind of am applying pressure here, and if I capture this knight, I'll destroy their pawn structure. I'm running very low on time. But let's see what black has in mind here. I think I have a very solid position. I don't see any weaknesses. Black also has a solid position, but they are down a pawn. This is a potential square for the knight to hop into if I am moving my queen off of the 4th rank. So I should be aware of that. Black may have some ideas of bringing the queen either to d6 or over to b8, trying to kind of eye this up a little bit more. But what else is going on in the position here? I wonder if black maybe could have gotten this b5 push in, which would then undermine my ability to get d5 in. Of course, that would have given me the open file. Okay, so an interesting move for sure. I think I'm going to continue to try and launch my assault. So maybe also in light of this concept or this idea of playing b5, perhaps one might argue that the f rook were to belongs on this d file, and the a rook maybe belonged on the c file. Yeah, it's very interesting. So what do I have available to me if they don't play this b5? Well, I want to get this pawn push in, and then they have a few ways that they can capture, either with their c pawn or their d pawn. So let's go ahead and get this pawn pushing. Probably they might have some idea of taking with the knight at the end of it and being able to defend their queen in that manner. But I also will then have this in-between move where I can first capture here. And then if they capture with the queen, I can take back with the pawn. So if they capture, they're going to be left with a worse pawn structure, and it's going to help activate my rooks. Now the key is to notice that black has a dark square bishop, so I really want to try and make use of the light squares. And that way the dark square bishop is kind of a little bit less effective. So they're opting not to take that pawn, which is a very interesting choice. And I'm wondering if I should take here, but takes, and that doesn't really do much for me. But can I hold that pawn? I don't know. Well, we need to make a decision. So let's just play e4, and this might be not the greatest move, but my idea is I just want to reinforce this pawn because I would like to keep this passed pawn in the future. I definitely cannot recommend that move by them because now I'm going to occupy this square here, and pretty much my knight's going to be a beast. So think about the weaknesses that you meet when you do a pawn push, because once you push the pawn, you'll never be able to take back that move. So now by pressing e5, the f5 square becomes a hole, and that is a great square for the knight to occupy. So now my idea is probably do a rook lift, maybe even double rooks, and let's see if we cannot set it a mating net potentially. I also should be aware that there is a potential fork here if, for whatever reason, alright, so let me create just a free square for my king to go to. Maybe that was probably a bad idea in hindsight. I'm just running a little low on time. I think positionally everything should be okay. Okay, unfortunately, I think I'm probably in a bit of a pickle now. But I think that is not how they should respond. Notice how once they move this bishop, I can recapture. So probably the commentary is going to falter slightly here. let's see how they respond. Alright, they're just hanging another pawn. So maybe I can now think about bringing my rook over and doubling up. Or even trying to promote my passed pawn. So now I'll just capture. In the last seconds there's a tactical shot, and I'll promote. Okay, so let's go back through. Let me tell him, my opponent, good game, and take a look at this game. So as I said, this is an interesting idea, bringing the bishop to f5, because it controls the c2 square, preventing the queen from coming into it. E3 is just aimed at developing, and that's E6 following the same suit. They want to get their bishop out, and they want to be able to castle. Here I'm trying to exchange because I feel that the bishop is a pretty strong piece, eyeing down this b1 to h7 diagonal. And I think this is where black went wrong. Initially I said it was winning a piece. I apologize. I meant to say it's just winning a clean pawn. And so now I think I thoroughly covered how there's only two, a pawn and a piece, the bishop guarding that e4 square, but I'm hitting at it 3 times. So once I capture, they just go down a pawn. Here, I think I had the right idea of trying to get my bishop developed, but I also failed to appreciate the knight f6 plan, hitting it. They're asking me if they're on YouTube. Not yet. I will. So yeah, this is from black's perspective. They have this Caro-Kann type of pawn structure, which is extremely solid. So it's on me to kind of break it down, even though I'm up a full pawn. Here they play knight f6, which I think is a nice move. It's a good move. And then I was debating whether or not to drop my queen back to c2 or to play this h4 move. Probably both are fine. The reason I chose not to go to c2 is I thought maybe it's a bit passive, and I find that my play can be a little too passive sometimes, and so I want to try and keep things complicated. Here, h5, I'm not fully certain of what they're aiming at achieving by doing this move. I know in my last game I also played that move, and that was in order, there was a rook that could have came to g4, but here it seems like it can just become a weakness, and I think it was a weakness in the game, which maybe I didn't even fully exploit, because if this knight is exchanged, well then my queen is ready to just capture that pawn. So I think it was probably an unnecessary weakening of the king side. They may have been concerned of ideas of knight g5 with my queen and knight then eyeing up that h7 square. However, I don't think I was really threatening that, or else I didn't see a way to make it come into reality. And then I played this move rook d1, and I wonder if they could have gotten this b5 push in here, and that would serve to kind of undermine my d5 push, because if I push d5 now, they can recapture here, and then maybe they'll capture back on the C pawn, or they could even, probably they would just recapture, or they would capture the E pawn. I would recapture the E with it on the E file, sorry, trying to destroy their pawn structure. That's something interesting, and I'll have to look at a little bit further. Alright. Now I think I appreciated this idea just slightly too late, that when I get this pawn push in, and their knight if their knight were to recapture there, it would be defending their queen. But I had this nice move, or this nice shot, that before I take back with a pawn, I can capture the queen, the knight, and once they recapture, I can destroy their pawn structure. And at this point, I wanted to reinforce this e5, d5 pawn, but also I wanted to try and shift my pawns to light squares, and in that manner I can try and limit the ability of the dark square bishop to attack my pawns. And had they, let's say, captured on d5, I would have simply recaptured, and then probably lifted my rook and doubled up and tried to march my pawn down. Instead, they pushed here, which I think it's an outright mistake, I believe, because you concede too much by giving up this f5 square, especially really the knight becomes a strong piece, and there's a lot of tactical liabilities considering that I had this fork, or not fork, but at least this check to give at some points. So I would say Black should also consider positional aspects before they do that. So maybe they were able to preserve a pawn, or at least not have to trade pawns, but they gave up something far greater, and that is kind of their position. At this point, I wonder if I think h3 is just a bad move. I may have had some way of giving a rook check, and then even somehow picking up this pawn. So I don't think that I can recommend this move. I was just a little bit hesitant, both the load time and also the back rank. And actually, my biggest concern was I wanted to get this rook here, but I didn't know how to do that. And I felt that if I could get my rook here, I would definitely be, attacking some of these pawns which are weakened. And I felt this just played right into my game, because instead of now getting to this square, I have the immediate target of getting to the c6 square. But of course, I think we're both in time pressure here, and probably the calculation is dropping off from both sides, and it's more of like a bullet match at this point. Clearly, this move hangs the f6 pawn, and now the f7 pawn falls as well. Yeah, I don't see any tactical shots. Probably, if I was really interested, I could have just picked up this a pawn over here. But I knew I already had a winning position, and I just wanted to push my d pawn. So I'd like to say thanks for watching the video, and PFIX, I hope you find something informative from this, and anyone can ask any questions they would like, and I will, to the best of my ability, answer them. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.